couple of things from the calendar that are coming up. You're probably going to get some email spam from us about this. Next week, ASCE coffee chat. So if you're enjoying talking and networking with each other here, we have another opportunity to do that. And it's going to be at Mozart's, a little bit further south than the last year that we've had. It's going to be from 7 to 9 next Tuesday. So hope to see you there. Coming up soon is the ASCE Region 6 Student Symposium. That's from April 10th to the 13th. So if you're involved more at the section level or in the student competitions, really exciting time for ASCE. We do have something on the calendar for our continuing ed event in April. That is going to be postponed till September. We just don't have the program far long enough to where it needs to be to open up registration. So we're going to kick that one back a few months so that we can put on a quality event. And there's probably going to be a slide for this, but I do want to mention that our next volunteer gig is for the Central Texas Food Bank on April 13th. So we are looking for some warm bodies to help staff that. And YMF's golf tournament is coming up on April 19th. So this one, I'm going to turn it over to announcements for anybody who has.
Thank you, Tyler. First of all, I just want to take a second to thank all of our sponsors right now. Obviously, everything that this organization gets to do is supported by the funds that come from our sponsors. So thank you all who have already contributed, and please consider contributing if you have not already. Quick announcement, we did have technical difficulties with the payment system as was mentioned, so please visit the back in case you have any issues with that.
Yes, just a few things that I want to say that if you did not finish the payment registration at the front or the front on the back, please at the end come up and finish that payment registration. If you're online and you have not completed your registration, please expect an invoice from our treasurer in the coming week or so. So thank you so much.
As Tyler mentioned too, we have an upcoming event for the Central Texas Food Bank. That's going to be on April 13th. There's some information here, the QR code as well, so you can scan it, and that'll get you some more information on how to get registered there. I see someone pulling their phone out, so I'll give you just a quick second here. Also, next week is going to be the coffee chat. We're going to be at Mozart's on the lake. If you've never been, it's a great venue. This is a free event to attend, and really the focus is just to get everybody together in a non-agenda based location event so that we can all just kind of like network together, chat about what we're seeing in the industry and around Austin. So hope you guys can make it out for that. You mentioned the continuing education conference. I have this in here. It looks like it's getting pushed back. Okay, ignore this. Don't save this date.
You say the idea, but not the date.
Yes, keep it front of mind, but we'll come back. And again, here's a slide that kind of builds upon what Tyler was saying about the success of the science mill. So over 300 guests, 30 different volunteers, and you know, I think this is always such a great way to interact with young minds and get them interested in STEM and potentially a pathway to engineering in the future. YMF updates, they've got their upcoming annual golf tournament on April 19th. There's a big call right now for sponsors for that. So if you and your firm would like to get involved in that, please look at some of the events that we have on the Austin ASCE calendar on the website. Or you can check out any of these social links for YMF Austin. Same thing here. And then want to take a quick second to thank our meeting sponsor, Terracon. Was there a representative from Terracon who wanted to come up and maybe have a few words?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're happy to be this month's corporate sponsor. My name is Edward Hines. I am the Geotech Department Manager for the Terracon Round Rock office. Terracon, we have two offices in the local area, one down south in South Austin, one in Round Rock. In addition, we've got 25 offices across the state and 175 offices nationwide. So we can be a very local geotech consultant. In addition to geotechnical services, we offer environmental consulting, third-party construction materials testing, and facility services. Across various sectors, including industrial, infrastructure, transportation, commercial, education, and healthcare, as well as multifamily. Some of the services that we offer include preliminary geotechnical engineering reports for site selection, as well as full geotech engineering reports for design and construction, phase 1 and phase 2 environmental services, NEPA compliance, construction materials testing, geophysical testing such as GPR, and seismic refraction testing, to name a few of those services. We do also offer one of our newer services is pavement asset management, using data collection, automated data collection, and AI software. So we're happy to be here. If you have any questions regarding some of the services we offer, how we can help you on your next project, just feel free to talk to me. There's also several Terracon people here. But we're excited about today's lecture, so thank you.
So I did want to take a second before we get started. So in 2024, the Ralph B. Peck Award was awarded to none other than our speaker today, Dr. Jorge Zornberg. Dr. Zornberg is joining us today with over 35 years of experience and practice and research in geotech and geosynthetics. His research focuses on transportation geotechnics, environmental geotechnics, geosynthetics, unsaturated soils, and expansive clays. He's had a long history of serving from 2010 through 2014 as the president of the International Geosynthetic Society. He also served as the Geo-Institute of ASCE in numerous roles, including chair of the Geosynthetics Technical Committee. He has authored over 550 technical publications, written several books, and been awarded 3 patents. Professor Zornberg received numerous prestigious awards, including the 2024 Peck Award. He was also recognized with the Mercer Lecture, ASCE's Pros Medal, the IGS Award, ASCE's Collington Wood Prize, as well as the Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers, awarded by the President of the United States. In 2019, the IGS established the Zornberg Lecture as an honorary lecture recognizing his contributions to the discipline of geosynthetics. And I can confidently say he has received more hugs and high fives than any speaker that I've seen come into ASCE in the past. So if y'all will please put your hands together for Mr. Jorge, Dr. Jorge Zornberg.
Thank you very much. It is such a privilege to be here, even though I'm here at home, and I want to emphasize a lot the importance of this local participation, and I congratulate the leaders of the Austin ASCE chapter, and I ask everyone's support to these local activities. I also want to thank the sponsors, Terracon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So I'm a professor here at UT Austin, and I would love to be able to interact more with the local community. I work a lot at the international level, at the national level, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more of you, the local engineers. The topic that I'm going to be discussing today has to do with roadways, and it has to do with expensive clays, and it has to do with centrifuge testing, and it has to do with geosynthetics, many different topics, all of them within the area of geotechnical engineering, but they are going to come all together because I'm going to show you some case histories. And the person after which this award is named, Dr. Ralph Peck, was a big proponent of putting everything together in the form of case histories. Let me get a sense of how cool are you guys? How many of you are structural engineers? Okay. How many of you are environmental engineers? Okay. How many of you are geotechs? Okay. All right. So, and maybe there are some, I cannot see you if you're online, but I'm going to be talking about some of the areas that have to do with geotechnical engineering, including some recognition of Professor Peck. And this is after the award that I received. I had the privilege of delivering this month ago at the Geo-Institute Congress, the 2024 Geo Congress, which happened to be in Canada. First time that the Geo Congress is not in the US. It's still the Geo Congress of ASCE, but was in Canada. So this is Ralph Peck in 1997. This is when I first met Professor Peck. And I happened to be a little bit younger at the time. This happened to be the first Geo Congress, which takes place once a year. This was I don't know, before ASCE did not have the institutes. This is the first Congress or geotechnical Congress of the Institute, of the Geo-Institute that was created around that time. Then I met Dr. Peck. Before coming to the University of Texas at Austin, I was a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. So the Geo Congress took place in Denver, and I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. Peck at the time. You may be familiar with Dr. Peck if you may have been familiar with the seminal book of Terracon and Peck, which was the very first, or among the first geotechnical engineering books that we're still using in our discipline. In order to recognize Professor Peck, I thought that I would bring a recognition. I interacted with Professor Peck, but at conference level, I did not know him so much at the personal level. So, but there's someone else that I did know very well, who happened to be my Ph.D. advisor, and is another giant of the geotechnical profession, that is Professor Jim Mitchell. He passed away 3 months ago. This is Professor Mitchell, and the one with black hair. You may not recognize the black hair, but that's me. Because the font is very small, this is a tribute that Professor Mitchell had to Professor Peck at the time of his passing. This was in 2008. So I mentioned 2 events: the 1997, which was my first Geo Congress, the 2000, in which is a Congress in which I was somewhat an organizer. And this is a different event that I'm going to discuss. It's a 2002 event, and I was not in that event, but Professor Mitchell was at that event. So let me tell you what Professor Mitchell had to say about him. A regular guy, rough at the podium, always the master of the situation. And I'm reading it assuming that you cannot read it. So the highlight of the 19th Central Pennsylvania Geotechnical Conference. So that was an event as local as this, which is great. But it was in Central Pennsylvania. It was in Hershey. And the core of that luncheon, like this, was dinner, actually dinner, not luncheon, dinner with Ralph Peck. And this was about the foundation of the Ryan Bridge increase. This is the longest a suspended bridge at the time in the world, maybe still. This is the one that was inaugurated by the Olympic torch when Greece hosted the Olympics in 2004. The very large banquet room was arranged so that the head table and speaker were located at the opposite side of the room from the projection screen where Dr. Peck's meticulously prepared slides were to be shown. As he began his talk, it rapidly became apparent that he could neither see the photos and illustrations in detail, nor could they be managed using the remote control available to him. My remote control should work. But I, Jim Mitchell, was sitting across the room close to both the projector and screen and was in a position to take over the job of advancing the slides at the appropriate time. And Raf readily accepted my offer to do so. So now I'm going to put it in a wider font, larger font, and I'm going to ask you to read it. So these are two giants in the geotechnical profession, and I think that it's very meaningful, Jim Mitchell saying it was an honor to be his assistant. And I think that as engineers, as civil engineers, as geotechnical engineers, we are privileged with the heritage that we have from the giants that preceded us. And we should be very proud of the important giants and extremely well-versed professionals that preceded us. So with this recognition of Professor Peck and in a certain way, Professor Mitchell, let me take you to what Professor Peck is known the most of. And there is a method that is called the observational method in geotechnical engineering. This observational method essentially means that you're going to do a design, but at the time of construction, you may be prepared for making redesigns, and this was particularly true for the case of tunnels. You're going to be redesigning your project as you're monitoring the project while it's being constructed. So the deflections, for example, that a tunnel can have at the time as it's being constructed will lead to the redesign of the next stages in the construction. That's the observational method, and it is very formal, and it requires certain checks and controls. But here, I don't know who took this picture. I wish I could provide proper credit on it in the internet, but I thought that this was the observational method in live taking place here with Raf Peck leading a crowd of people trying to figure out, observing what is happening. But in this presentation, I'm not going to go through a formal observational method, but through some approach that I would still consider is more of an observational approach. And even though I'm a geotechnical engineer, I work a lot with roadways. And this is the most massive asset in the United States, public asset. We are talking about the total roadways in the US of being 4.2 billion miles. It's so significant that we may not have a sense of what this means. Just to have a sense, we're talking about, just so you know, the circumference of the Earth around the equator is just 25,000 miles. So if you were to put all our roads one after the other and go around the equator, you will need to go just with the roads in the US 170 times in order to account for the massive asset that we need to build, maintain, and protect. So it's a very, very massive asset, and any contribution that we can make to better the performance of this important asset will make a significant impact in our profession as civil engineers. So let me walk you through what we know very briefly about the direction that we're going in the design of roadways. But when we design roadways, we design them strictly, very important, for traffic loads, and it makes sense. But the very difficult aspect, and I respect, when I design slopes or walls, that's easy. That's easy because I design my walls and my slopes against failure, against collapse. That's so well defined. And I put a factor of safety and I know that's well defined. But designing for serviceability, that's much more difficult. Designing for deformability, that's much. And that's how we design roadways. And that's not a trivial task. And so, and actually, it's not a trivial task because if we design a road that never fails, that's a horrible design. That's a terrible design. You're wasting the resources that it takes to build 10 times the roadways that you have been designed. So when we design a road, we design it so that we achieve a certain performance or a certain serviceability after a certain time. For example, you design a roadway so that it doesn't exceed a rutting depth of 1/2 inch after 15 years. Go and design for that. That's not trivial. So of course, if we here in the vertical axis, we have serviceability, whatever that serviceability is, let's say a certain rutting depth versus time. And yes, we do not want a design that takes us to a more significant rutting depth than the target. But an equally bad design is one that after the design life, let's say 15 years, we have no rutting depth or a rutting depth of 1/10 of an inch. That's also bad design. So designing the correct design, targeting the appropriate design criterion is not an easy task. For many, many years, and again, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the mechanistic empirical design. That's the direction in which we are moving in the design of roadways. But for a long, long time, this was such a complex problem that essentially we had to do a lot of empiricism to target this design. So let me tell you about the trend in which we are moving, if you're not familiar with the mechanical empirical design, that is being implemented by ASCE, is being adopted by TxDOT. The idea is the following. There are elements that we will not be able to predict. Writing that is very difficult to predict. But there are elements that we can predict. We can predict stresses. We can predict some levels of deformation. So let's predict the parameters that we can predict. And then let's use empiricism to using those certain thresholds on the stresses, on the deflections that we can calculate. Let's use that as a threshold to calculate the distress, the damage. So that's the basis of the mechanistic empirical design. So just to put it in a cartoon. So you're going to come with the traffic loads, these are repeated loads, these are cyclic loads, and we are going to define elements. There are some parameters, there are some response that we can predict. We do not design for the tensile stress at the base of at the bottom of the asphaltic layer, but we can calculate. We can calculate that. We can calculate the compressive loads or the deflection at the top of the subgrade. So with the elements that we can calculate, that's the mechanistic component of our design. Then that's when we're gonna come back with the empiricism to translate, and this has a formal process, this requires field data, and it's called transfer functions. So we're gonna use the transfer functions to transform that level of stresses beyond a certain threshold to a certain damage. And we're designing for damage. So ultimately, the accumulation of these responses, this damage accumulation is eventually what is going to come and define the distress. And this is what we do not want to see in a road. And this is very hard to predict, but this is not so hard. You can do a better job. So if we put a reasonable thresholds on the stresses and deflections, that use that to empirically come up with the distress. Ultimately, and we close the loop, and this distress, if we do a good job, is going to be used to recalibrate the design thresholds. So it's a closed loop, and this is the basis for the mechanical empirical design of roadways, which is not formally the observational method of Professor Peck, but I would contend that it has many of the elements in this observational approach. But that was traffic laws, and we know a lot about this, and we're moving in this direction. What about environmental laws? And expansive place, we're going to see that the distress that we achieve, that can be reached with expansive place, may have nothing to do with the traffic laws. This is a fingerprint of the failure by serviceability that occurs if my road is an expansive place. If you drive here to East Austin, you're going to see a lot of this. You're going to see a lot of this. And none of them have anything to do with traffic laws. These are different laws. And the current framework for designing roads doesn't help us. Here's another one. And here's another one. So how do we design for this? Because this has nothing to do with my traffic. And my roads, I know how to design for traffic. So we need something different. So, and we do not have little trouble with this. We have a lot, even though it has taken a while for us to recognize it, this is a very old problem. We know about this. We have been dealing with this because a lot of the US has a significant fraction of expansive place. We may have not known what is the cause of the distress, but we know. So here you see the US. In the entire central US, you see a lot of blue. A lot of blue means a lot of a significant fraction of expansive place. The entire central US, certainly Texas. If you see red, that is a high fraction of expansive place. So if we were land developers, we will say, don't put your cities there. But we in Texas may have not gotten the memo. Because if you see this red, this is Eagle Ford formation. So, and there you have 4 of our 5 largest cities are right in there. It's along I-35. Someone may have said, oh, this is a nice place to put a road, and that's where it started. So there you have Dallas and Fort Worth and Waco and Austin and San Antonio. Now it's too late to change our location. So now we need to handle it as it is. And we need to start by recognizing what is the mechanism by which these failures occur. The original thinking was that, well, this is expansive place crack. So there's these humongous cracks are probably developing in the subgrade, and we do not see them, and they're longitudinal, and eventually they propagate to the surface. No, that's not what happens. And we need to understand the mechanism in order to understand how to solve the problem. So this is more or less what happened. And it's a very simple mechanics problem. It's a mechanics problem. So during the dry season, it's a mechanics and flow problem and the volumetric cell problem. So maybe it's getting a little bit more. But essentially what happens is that during the dry season, water infiltrates into the road because it's a paved road, infiltrates from the shoulders. And the shoulders change moisture much faster than the center line. We're talking about months for the water to advance from the shoulders to the center line. And in the process of water advancing, the soil swells. And in the process of water leaving, the soil shrinks. And that's what happens with it. So during the dry season, when the moisture is leaving from the shoulders, but not leaving yet from the center line, is when the shoulders flex. And we all know that if a beam flexes enough, it cracks. And that's when we're going to see the longitudinal cracks that develop. That is the reason why you're going to see longitudinal cracks when you drive by in East Austin. And actually, during the wet season, the shoulders will heave in relation to this. And the cracks may even close. So may have been 1/4 of an inch and may become 1/10 of an inch, but the crack is already there. And the problem is once the crack is there, water infiltrates and the acceleration, the degradation has already, mechanisms have already started. And if you don't believe it, because this was logical, but we didn't have data, so we collect data. This is Turnersville Road here in East Boston. So if we go, and you see the longitudinal cracks, and actually, and you can see here, you can see the posts tilting. So this is currently rising. But if we go and measure and some here in the audience may have even taken some measurements in here. So if we go and measure, not in no particular date, not particularly prime, no particular date, this was okay. But it's often we gradually see that we go and measure the cross section from 2015 to 2019. Just the changes in elevation of the shoulders in relation to the center line. We're talking about, and again, no particular extreme dry or wet event. We're talking about just an inch or so. These are over 30 millimeters. Just randomly going and measuring the elevation, the relative elevation of the shoulders in relation to this. And in the width of a single lane. So now, this is just roadways, but this is not an exception. With data coming from insurance companies, and this is mainly your window that doesn't close, or your door that doesn't open, or you see the crack in your ceiling, coming from insurance claims, the costs associated with expansive clays in the US exceed 15 billion with a B dollars a year. This is more than, this is not life-threatening, that's true. But this is more than any other geohazard, tornadoes and floodings and earthquakes combined on an yearly basis. This is a massive resource that we need to cope with because we're not handling the expensive place approach. If you don't believe me, this is not going to get any better. I do not have what happened in 2023, but I looked, and I don't know if you're familiar with the source of this data. NOAA, through the National Center of Environmental Information, they collect on a yearly basis the number of events, the damages of which exceed $1 billion. This is an infamous list. This is the list of, this is the $1 billion weather disaster list every year. So this and they have special considerations on the type of investigation that they're going to do with this weather disaster. Just so you know, this started in 1980, so they have 44 years of data. And the 6 ones that are represented here are the 6 top ones, the top 6 ones. Let's see where we are in 2023. We topped the chart in the last 43 years. So yes, we had 28 national disasters, the cost of which exceeded $1 billion. But this is over 44 years. Well, but I can see 2022 to makes it the top 6. And in 2021 is also there. And 2020 is also there. So out of the last 44 years, the last 4 or 5 years are the top 6. So this is not telling me that we're going to get any better with weather-related disasters. And indeed, if you want to know, out of the total cost was, I think, adding only the $1 billion disasters, not all the natural disasters, but those disasters that exceeded the 28 events that exceeded $1 billion each. I think that it is in the order of $81 billion for 2023. And again, this is data released last month. And the worst one was the heat wave in 2023. $14.5 billion. And this doesn't include our roads. This doesn't include your home. This is mainly disasters and costs associated mainly with agricultural and water issues. So this is not going to get any better. This is the list of the water-related, of the drought-related disasters, and here is 2023, $14.5 billion. Again, this doesn't include our roads, but I thought there was the data that will tell us that this is not going to get any better anytime soon. So with this, the professor and me may ask you a couple of questions. So question one, and I may have given this up. What mechanism is responsible for the distress in roadways on expansive plates?
Shrink swell.
Shrink swell, yes. And is it this because there is a humongous crack in the subgrade that propagates to the top? No, correct. So it is because there is a differential vertical movement caused by moisture fluctuations. Okay, let me give you a second question. Are there practical methods? Are practical methods available for roadway design to characterize, not to solve, to characterize expansive clay sites, and not expansive clay soils, a site? I want to know if I have problem with this site. Again, I didn't give this up yet, but what do you think based on what your understanding? Do we have practical we may have research. Do we have practical methods to identify where these $15 billion, how to solve that, characterize if we have a problem that will contribute to the next $15 billion a year? What methods do it? Are you familiar with that? Which one? Texas PDR. I would contend that that's in the right direction. I'm going to give it a maybe. But I'm going to be hopeful because that's going to be at the heart of what I'm going to tell you next. Yes, and the direction is Texas PDR, at least in that direction. So let's start with characterizing the problem. And let me walk you through what is that we need to do to understand this problem of expansive clays. So really what's going on here, the culprit is the mineralogy of our clays. So this is the Eagle Ford clay that we have from Dallas. And maybe it isn't a microscope. Many would attribute the fact that this is an expansive clay because these are tiny particles, and that's partly true. But the real reason that this is an expansive clay is because they are negatively charged. There is a process, geologic process, that is called isomorpho substitution that makes these clays being negatively charged. And actually, this electron microscope doesn't make justice because it's very hard to get an electron microscope of a clay with water. We do not have, the techniques are very difficult, but this is the gooey thing that you get when that clay gets water. And I'm going to try your memory, maybe if you get into grad school, in geotech, there is an explanation for this. There is a theory for this. And this is the theory of the diffuse double layer. That's okay if you didn't get to that chapter in your undergrad. But this is the idea. If this is a clay particle, it's negatively charged. And here we have pore water. And the pore water is an equilibrium. It's an electrolyte that has cations and anions that are in equilibrium with each other, but far away from these negatively charged. So what happens is that when our electrolyte gets closer to that surface, essentially the anions, the positively charged sodium, calcium, magnesium, will be attracted to this surface, and all the anions will stay far. And that's fine, and this is what we call the diffuse double layer. There's a theory for that. The problem is that not only the diffuse double layer expands and develops when we have this negatively charged surface, but also it depends on the availability of water. If water evaporates, essentially we're not giving the opportunity to these anions to stay as anions, to be as far away from the clay surface as they want. And literally what we're doing, we're spring loading with water, essentially the surface right next to the clay. And as soon as water, if we give water to a dry clay, what's happening? It sucks it up. And so it's ready to take it up. And with that comes the volumetric changes. So this is in a very short way, this one slide may be an entire graduate course. But this is more or less what happens on why we do have clays behave the way that they do. All right, and we have methods. We have methods to characterize this. You should remember going to the lab to do your consolidation test. Do you remember that? Yeah. So it's the same equipment that we use to measure the swelling potential of clays. The difference, what you may have done or you may remember from undergrad, is that we do this to consolidate, to compress saturated clays. This is different. We're going to start with an unsaturated soil, and we're going to add load, and we're going to measure how much it swells. And we're going to measure the swelling potential for a given load. For a given load, for a given confinement, we measure the swelling potential of the clay. There's a problem, and it takes time. So here is the swelling versus time. So here is 2 weeks, and I would say that we're not done with the test. And this is a big equipment. So, and we do not need one of these tests. We need a battery of these tests because we need this swelling for different confinements. Are we doing this? We have the capabilities. It's an ASTM standard. Do we do it? Any one of these? Who mentioned PDR? Have you ever done this, a swelling test? You did? How do you use it? Well, we'll talk. But in my experience, it exists. We don't do it. The reason that we do not do it is because it takes a long time. And it's very expensive. And if I'm going to characterize a new project, I need to do this with borings every 500 feet. Who's going to do this? So we don't do it. And this is the worst part. It's really one data point doesn't do the job. We need different, here's swelling tests at different confinement levels, because ultimately what we really need is this curve. In the vertical axis, the magnitude of swelling, 15%, that's a lot. That's a lot, 15%. If your layer is 10 feet thick, it swells 1.5 foot. So that's a lot of swelling. That's a lot of swelling. But it decreases rapidly with increased confinement. And we need that relationship. In order to characterize this, we need this relationship between swelling and confinement. So that's when the PDR comes. That's when the PDR comes. And it's a good concept. It's a good concept. This is the concept. And this was developed in the 60s by Terracon. The idea is that if we have a boring or a profile, let's get here is 2, 4, 6, 8 feet deep. Most of the action is going to take place close to the surface. So how much, if these top 2 feet go from the initial moisture content, let's say reasonably dry, to saturation, how much contribution, what is the potential rise? I showed you data that shows the rise of the shoulders in relation to the center line. This is the potential. Because not necessarily there's going to be a flood. So not necessarily we're going to take the soil in practice to saturation, but as a potential, as an index. I like the term performance index. As a performance index, what is the potential that the top 2 feet can contribute? Okay, let's measure. What is the potential that the second 2 feet can? Okay, let's do this. The third 2 feet. And the fourth, and for the same change in moisture, the bottom 2 feet contribute much less than the top 2 feet. That has to do with the confinement. And this is the PDR. This is the PDR. What we measure is if the soil profile is not one clay, it's an entire profile, goes from a reasonably dry condition to saturation, how much my ground is going to hit. And that's a potential vertical rise, an important parameter. And so here it is. So this is the contribution of each one of the top 2 feet, the second 2 feet, the third, the fourth. And we measure the swelling versus depth. Does this account for all variables? Not for all, but for many very important variables. What are the area of this curve? Really, if we increase the number of these spaces, more, that's going to be the area of that curve is my PDR. So, but this is very relevant because it tells me a lot about the soil characteristics. It tells me a lot about I need to know the stratigraphy. It tells me a lot about the initial, I take into consideration the initial moisture content. I take into consideration the very important impact of effective stresses of the confinement in getting this, but it doesn't take into consideration everything. And most importantly, if we really rotate this is the swell stress curve that we just quoted. So really what the PDR is, because depth relates to confinement, what the PDR is mathematically or theoretically is really the area under the swell stress curve. If we have that from the lab, we're done to calculate the PDR. We can do a good job with calculating the PDR if we have the data. And for example, this comes directly from the pavement design manual in TechStot. It tells us, well, this seems to be a right parameter. So let's design essentially what it says here, that our highways need to be designed to a PDR that doesn't exceed 1.5 inches. That doesn't mean that 1.5 inches is going to occur. It means that this is a good performance index that as a design criterion, I shall not exceed. All right, it sounds all good. So there are many good reasons. And by the way, this was adopted by us, which is a very difficult thing to achieve. So there are very good reasons to endorse this PBR approach. The outcome is easy to understand. It can be related to performance. It accounts for the right variables, not all the relevant variables, but many very important variables are accounted for in this PBR, but it has some problems. The problem is that we didn't do the tests. Swelling tests were done in the 1960s. And when we realized that no one is going to continue doing these tests, we said, well, let's correlate the swelling, the PDR, to something that our engineers are going to do. And there came the plasticity index. But the plasticity index is not the PDR. The plasticity index is used to correlate with the PDR. Oh, but we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corrections. This is a very simple test, the simplest that you can think of to characterize a clay. And you apply 6 corrections and you get to the PDR. So I'm going to contend that if you're familiar with the PDR as we use it today, you get this TechStot spreadsheet, you plug in the numbers, the PDR, the plasticity index, and you get the PDR. What you're getting is correlations with plasticity index from tests done in the 60s with 8 corrections, and that's how you're going to make a multi-million-dollar decision. Fixing this is expensive if you have it. So, and the data is problematic because it's too little, it's too old, and there are correlations that were extrapolated beyond available data. I'm going to go very quickly, very quickly, because we do not have time, just to give you a sense, because if right now you plug into a spreadsheet, you may not know what you're using. Let me tell you, how many of you have used the spreadsheet to calculate PDR? Okay. If you plug in the numbers, let me tell you what the data is. I'm gonna go very quickly because this could be a presentation. Essentially, this is the data from the 1960s that essentially correlates the volumetric swelling and shrinkage against the plasticity index. In order to get this, you need an initial moisture content. So that's why you see several curves, dry and wet. Many data points I have from the 60s to all this comes from some sites in San Antonio. To get the dry soil, the dry condition that you choose, it comes like 10 points. How many for your wet? 6. That's how we are using, and this is not all. This doesn't have confinement. This is for a 1 PSI confinement. But we really need PIs. Here are PIs. We need more plasticity index that may increase. Oh, we do not have data, but we have already identified the trend. So this is where your spreadsheet is coming from. But that's not it. because this was for one PSI confinement, but we need this for different levels of confinement. So this is essentially the data collected in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 data points to get the entire set. Now we're talking about functions, not one number, an entire function that gives me the swelling versus confinement. That's where the data comes from. Really, the Peck 124E uses it in a different way. This is what you get. They don't even show you the data because the data is very little to see. So, good concept, relevant variables. But I wouldn't be surprised if you tell me I do not see much correlation between distress and my plaque PI, because this is a very simplistic initial evaluation with very little data, with very little data. But the problem is real. To get, let's augment this database. Well, we need a lot of time and money, and I'm going to do that for my product. So that's when the research came about. So reasonably recently, but I'm talking about now a decade more. We have been accelerating the swelling tests. And if you do an infiltration test and you want to accelerate the infiltration of water into your soil, if you recall how we do a hydraulic conductivity test, remember how we do it? We put this triathlon or the specimen in a cell, and we need to taste a clay. So it will take a month to give me the hydraulic conductivity. It may take a month to get the swell. So what you do is you accelerate the water front. And the way that you do it, you increase the gradient. You remember the hydraulic gradient? And the way to increase the hydraulic gradient is by adding differential pressure. But that's doable with saturated clays. And that's what we do to measure the saturated hydraulic conductivity. That's much harder to do that infiltration, a gradient in pressure in an unsaturated salt, because now the pressure is negative, it's suction. To put a gradient in negative pressure, that's very, very difficult. But let me remind you to what you learned the first time that you saw Darcy's law. The hydraulic head has two components, the elevation head, Z, and the pressure head. Typically, you would have seen here U. I'm putting it as C to indicate that this pressure is negative. Under unsaturated conditions, there is water pressure, but that pressure is negative, C. And what drives the flow is the grade. This is energy. This is energy per unit weight. And we call it has units of weight, units of length. What we really need is a gradient in hydraulic head. So if we derive the two components of the hydraulic head, is 1 plus the gradient in such. That's the hydraulic gradient. And if you remember, we use Darcy's law. And with Darcy's law, we have the hydraulic conductivity, which in saturated conditions is a number, in unsaturated conditions is a function. So here's the hydraulic conductivity times the gradient. And in our testing, in a saturated salt, we mess up with this to increase the gradient, to get our test that would take 2 months to get us the data point, to get us the data in 1 day, hopefully. But under unsaturated conditions, we cannot. It's very hard to impose these gradients and such. So what about if we change this number 1? Can we change this? Yes, we can change the number 1, because really this is a normalized potential energy. This comes from essentially the gravitational energy that changes from one elevation to the other. That is normalized into a difference in elevations. So if we put this permeameter in a centrifuge, we accelerate the number of gravities that we're subjecting it. So we really can change that number 1 to a number 10. We have 10 times acceleration. Right? The acceleration corresponding to 10 times acceleration, right? To 50, to 100, maybe 500. So now we're talking. So now we can accelerate the infiltration, and that's what we did at the University of Texas at Austin. We have a geotechnical centrifuge in which we can accelerate the passage, really will accelerate the flow process by increasing this gravitational potential. At the end, TechStop was interested. We were very interested in many models, some flow problems, and said, no, just give me the swelling. Just give me the swelling. Well, but if you want just the swelling, we can do an equipment that is much simpler. Well, you see, essentially, it's kind of in medical. Okay, I'm not going to get into this, but the reason that was developed was to essentially to measure an important property. It's directly measure the unsaturated component. And we can do this, no one can do this unless, that's why if you ever do unsaturated flow, we just guess what that function is. We don't measure it. We can measure it in the centrifuge. So I'm not going to walk you through that, but Texas said, well, you can also accelerate the infiltration that it takes to get the swelling. And for that, we do not need this big centrifuge. And we do not need to measure moisture. And we do not need to impose flux. We just need to measure volume changes. And we can do that in a smaller centrifuge. And by the way, this is the size of a washer machine. And honestly, we can do, instead of one specimen at a time, let's do 6, because this is used a lot in medical business. So, and essentially, what we can do is we accelerate the infiltration of water, and now what we will get is this initially in specimen swelling, and we can measure this. So essentially, we're going to do that. We're going to measure the swelling. And the idea, if we do that by measuring this swelling with sensors, we measure the G level. And the big jump was when we were able to transmit this data wirelessly from a very highly speeding environment to our data collection system. And here it is. Notice the color. So here it is. So we get, in this case, 6 swelling versus time data points simultaneously, rapidly. And essentially, this is the data that we would obtain for a given clay if we use the conventional that exists, the swelling test that exists, method that exists. Here is after 5 days. But this is what we get in a centrifuge and in the same 5 days. And this is with an increased gravitational field, with 50 Gs, with 100 times the acceleration of gravity. You can really appreciate this if we let the 1G test take place over, in this case, over 2 months, or almost 2 months. So we ultimately get the swelling. Really what we want is, here the swelling is almost 6%. We want that 6%. But we get it in 24 hours rather than maybe 2 months. So the idea is that, okay, now we can get the data that was so hard to get in the 1960s when this concept was developed. Oh, but what about the centrifuge data? Does it match the field data? Not field data, the conventional swelling test that takes 3 months. Yes, here in blue is the centrifuge data. This is swell versus effective stress. Swell versus stress. Red is the blue is centrifuge, red is conventional. And this is a different clay. So yes, the data, the swell stress curve that is ultimately what we want, matches the one that we would obtain using the conventional test. So we're happy. We're happy. And so the benefits of the centrifuge testing is that now we can get rid, potentially, of measuring just the plasticity index to correlate to swelling, but to measure swelling, if what we want is swelling. So, and that's what this centrifuge approach can do. That is, provide a direct measurement of the swelling. And the results could be, if we get the swell stress curve, literally the area under that curve is the PBR. For example, in this particular site that some of you may be familiar with, here we have clearly based on the color and texture, there are two main clays at different borings. And here's the data telling us that yes, this is in these two different clays, kind of belong to the same family. And let's say if we go to boring number 3, we say, okay, what is the PBR here? And we can say, okay, we have the swell stress curve for the two clays that correspond to this soil. So give me the confining pressures. Well, here the blue component goes from here to here, and the red component goes from here to here. The area under those two curves is how much I expect this site to swell once this goes from the initial moisture content to saturation. And this is your PBR. So we can get it. So I walked you through question number 1, and I told you question number 2, are there practical methods available? I could say yes. The PBR already existed, but it was, I would say, there were many questions. It was not reliable. It was too simplistic. Now we can do it, and it's still practical. All right, how can we do the design? So now that we can get the PBR, what about, where is this 1.5 inches that we need to have this design criterion in roadways? Where's it coming from? I interviewed so many engineers in Texas. No one knows where it's coming from. But now we can get the data. If we can get the PBR reliably, we can correlate it to this stress. So this is different than the design for traffic loads, but it may follow the same philosophy. Let's calculate what we can calculate. The PBR is not a real, it's not a prediction of the actual loss. That we will need weather conditions. It's an index, it's a performance. But let's get it. Let's correlate it. That's I'm going to call it the mechanistic component. And let's correlate that to performance. In this case, it's going to be the longitudinal cracks. And this is going to be, in a sense, back to the observational approach. All right, now we know if we have a problem. But what if I have a problem? How do I solve this? And that's a different story. If I have a problem, this PBR would allow me to use, for example, line stabilization. Line stabilization. And I think that if we do it correctly, that's a good approach, but it may be too expensive. And my main concern with line stabilization is that it's not forgiving for partial treatment. So if we do the analysis and we conclude, and Larson tells me that, okay, we need to treat 3 feet of my subgrade in order to kill the swell. So if you do that, that's going to be a good approach. But very often they said, you know what, I'm not going to excavate 3 feet and treat and replace. I'm going to do that with 6 inches. I'm going to treat the top 6 inches. Is better than nothing. And that's wrong. Because yes, this total swelling will be less, but now the less amount of swelling will have this brittle crust. That is soil, the lime treated soil. So what we're trying to avoid is a triggering of the longitudinal cracks. And the triggering of longitudinal cracks, to avoid it, yes, less swelling will help. But now you have something that was ductile, you made it brittle. So you could not, in many cases, a partial treatment may lead to more cracks than what you had with no treatment at all. So there's an alternative, and I'm going to tell you about that alternative. That has to do with the use of geosynthetics to solve this problem. Geosynthetics can be used. Are you familiar with geosynthetics? Okay. So geosynthetics can be used for many applications in roadways, many applications, and they can be used for, they can be used in many of the different layers of roadways. They can be used for separation, and they can be used for reinforcement, and they can be used for stiffening, and they can be used for filtration, and they can be used for barriers, and they can be used for in-plane drainage. many different opportunities to improve the road's performance. But I'm gonna take you to one more application, which is the use of geosynthetics to mitigate problems associated with the presence of expansive clays. And there are different ways in which geosynthetics can be used and have been used. One could be to maintain the integrity of the, remember, we're delaying, we're retarding, we're avoiding the development of longitudinal cracks. Let's make our system ductile enough so that our cracks do not develop. That would be an alternative. The other would be to control the moisture. If we make a moisture uniform. Another one would be to reinforce the asphaltic layer. Another one would be to prevent the moisture access. Many different ways in which geosynthetics could be used. But I'm going to focus on one, because from what I told you, we are not going to directly use the PBR to calculate this. We're going to use it to predict performance. And to predict performance, we need data. I'm going to focus on the first one, particularly in many good reasons, but an important reason is that we have data. We have data, and so essentially what I'm gonna focus on is how to address this problem by using geosynthetics within the unbound aggregate layer. And I'm gonna go much more quickly. Do we have ways, does this work? So now we go to the field. This is a road with geosynthetics, and we do not see the longitudinal cracks. The same road, the same soil, the same weather conditions, the same drainage conditions. The only thing is it doesn't have a geosynthetic. It did not perform. You see the longitudinal cracks. Another road, the same road, but let's even make the thickness of the road base thinner and without longitudinal. So the lesson is the geosynthetics, at least in this particular case, with test sections, and TechStart is very good at creating test sections whenever a new method or new technology is being considered. Did work. So we started working with TechStart, and we got a call. And say, we're building this new road, SH7 in Bryan District, and it's not even open to traffic, but I already see the longitudinal cracks, and we have the geogrids. Okay, we have a problem. So let's go and look at it. Let's do a forensic evaluation. And I was far away, I was looking, everyone was laughing. What happens? The geogrid was not the width that had been specified, but it was 4 feet thinner. The roll was 4 feet shorter. So yes, so there was a longitudinal crack where exactly where the geogrid ended. So it was very expensive because the contractor had to remove this and replace it. But this was an excellent field experiment because it demonstrated that the geogrids did work. So the lesson learned from here is that the geogrids appear to work, but if they exist. So don't ask the geogrid to work if they are not there. But not everything was rosy. So at the time, I'm talking about more than a decade ago. So here's a geogrid with a given test section and another geogrid B that also met the specifications that existed at the time, and it did. So the specifications that we had at the time were not necessarily suitable to identify those geogrids that would work from those that would not. Because of time, I'm gonna tell you a very long story. I'm gonna make it very, very short. There's other questions that I have, because third question, and I'm gonna give you the answer to the question. Have geosynthetics been successfully used to prevent the development of longitudinal cracks? I hope that you agree that I showed you at least some good evidence. Second question. This is a tough one. What type of geosynthetics work best? for roadways and utilities. It's a very good question. And I'm going to give an answer that as engineers, you probably do very often. Well, it depends. So it turns out that at the time, we were working on using geosynthetics for a different application, which is not the application in an expensive place. But the application was for essentially to decrease, to increase the stiffness of the base layer. If we manage to increase the stiffness of the base layer, we can decrease the required thickness of the base layer. That's a different application. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to tell you that there was a parameter that was developed that measured the confined stiffness of the soil geosynthetic composite. That's a mouthful, and I can spend more time on this. But essentially what we're looking is a measure of the interaction between the geosynthetic and the soil. Chaos is laughing. But so essentially what we're going to do here is we are going to measure the confined stiffness, which is not trivial. And with that, we get the parameter that we want. And I'm not going to show you this, but this is meant to be a video. And we learned a lot about this parameter. What you're seeing here is that test of transparent walls and with transparent soil. Trust me, it exists. I'm not going to show you because I'm running out of time. But transparent soil to learn about how this interaction works. I'm not going to walk you through that. And also this is a cross section. These are the particles that we can see with this process with laser plane on essentially on transparency. And we can measure how this interaction works. So, but it turns out that this told us that there is a good, not all geosynthetic surface. Here in the vertical axis, this parameter, the confined stiffness. In the horizontal axis, many differences. Not all of them are the same. But we can go to the field. We can go to the field actually, and this parameter was useful. I'm going to walk back because I'm running out of time. But I can go to the field and measure what happens when we use geosynthetics in the field. And TechStock has many different sites that we can go back to evaluate how these test sections have performed over the years. I'm not going to show you because I don't have time, but here in the long version of this presentation, I will show you the data from 6 different sites. And the type of information, this is FM2 in Bryan District. And essentially what we can get after the evaluation of the different cross sections, some of them with and some of them without geogrids, is a measure of the longitudinal cracks, the length of the longitudinal cracks in the test sections with or without lime, the test sections with or without geosynthetic, and more geosynthetic 1 and 2 and 3. And these are some images. This is essentially another field validation to confirm that the longitudinal cracks develop from the top down. But ultimately, let me show you just one piece of data. One piece of data that tells me that this happens to be in 2011, so dry season. The longitudinal cracks started before the dry season being 8% of the total length of the section, ended up being 65%. That's what this does. What about the one with the geosynthetics? And we have 4 repeats for each one of these test sections. Well, definitely it's not 0. This is what we now call geosynthetic type 1. Now we have a better one, type 2, and a better one, type 3. Yes, it did statistically significantly better than without the geosynthetic. What about lime stabilization? The lime stabilization was incomplete, so let me clarify that. Not much better. So what we can do out of this, and seeing is believing. So nothing better than a good picture. Here on your right is the control section without geosynthetics. On your left, same soil, same traffic, same weather conditions, same drainage conditions. No geosynthetics, with geosynthetics. So this is the stabilized section, and this is the control section. So ultimately from here, we can get to what, from the performance point of view, from the can be considered acceptable and what cannot. And it correlates well with the ASGC parameter that we have been developed. By the way, the performance of the three geosynthetics was reasonably similar, and the KSGC was reasonably similar. And the control sections, and actually the lime stabilized section was not. All right, I have many other sites that I could show you, and I'm not. But I can give you reports to show you that. But this is the last site that I had, in which there were geosynthetics that did work and geosynthetics that did not work. But ultimately, we can get into how to correlate now with field performance, the KSGC against different geosynthetics. And essentially, and this is subjective, but it's with input from TechSot, what was the value that was considered acceptable, what is not. This is mainly for specifications, to write a specification. And more than that, TechSot, and this is where the data is coming from. And the data here on the top, you have where the data, from what site the data is coming from. And based on this, not only we could say what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, what is better than not. So TechSot concluded that rather than considering a single type of geosynthetic, they're going to consider an acceptable one, a better one, and a highly desired. So with this, I'm back to my questions. I had already discussed number 1. Question number 4, what geosynthetics work best? I would say are those with high stiffness of the composite. And with that, I'm gonna very quickly thank, this is a formal presentation, at least in Vancouver, my family, Texas DOT, many of my partners, including the National Science Foundation and geosynthetic manufacturers, and mainly my research team. Several of you are here. I only have space to show my PhD students. So a lot of the work comes from Dr. Rudy's work, but this is my research team over the years, and many of them contributed to this. So to summarize, I can leave you with some simple takeaways from this presentation. The use of geosynthetic centrifuge technology led to practical and expeditious determination of well-stress relationship, which is what we need to use the PBR. This matches the results with conventional tests that take much longer to obtain. And the results of this data, this approach is particularly suitable if what you are looking for is to calculate or predict the PBR. That's in relation to if you have a problem. If you do, then you have options. One would be lime stabilization, which I didn't focus on, but it's an option. The other is the use of geosynthetics that was found to effectively minimize the problems associated with the presence of expensive clays. Not only that, but this represents a much needed alternative to chemical stabilization. So now we have mechanical stabilization or chemical stabilization to address the problem associated with expensive clays. And at least one parameter, may not be the only one, but at least one parameter was identified to correlate, to differentiate the performance that is expected from different geosynthetic products. And final remarks, and this is more holistic, honoring Professor Peck, the observational approach, it was not formally what I showed you, but we went to the field, we get feedback from the field, and we defined thresholds of a parameter to make use in design, in future design. And with the use of case histories, I showed you some, we can put together many different concepts, such as, in this case, expansive clays and roadway design and centrifuge testing and geosynthetics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zornberg. We'll do questions after here. I know we've gone over time, so if you have a question, please come up. Can I have a head count for today? Great turnout. So hope to see everybody here in April for our next meeting. And thank you. We're adjourned.